So this podcast is just an introduction to the COMP5000 coursework. So the coursework can be completed individually or in pairs, and there's a deadline of 4 p.m. on 20th of January. And you have to submit the material to the DLE. So the basic idea is you have I've given you some comma separated value files, and this describes the working of a small chain of coffee shops. There's a variety of files, some of which I told you to ignore. Sales target should ignore, generation should ignore, and there's information about the staff. So the idea is to design a database, convert these CSV files into a properly normalized database, load up the database, convert from the CSV files into tables, and then write a little GUI to add additional information to the database, such as a new customer, and to do some simple statistical analysis, calculate the total number of customers who are baby boomers, draw a histogram, and calculate the mean waste. One thing to stress about, so I'm asking you to provide a document. It's not meant to be like a written report. It is just meant to be a sort of summary of what you've done. So you can read the document yourself. Here I'm just going over the steps. So I'd kind of work on it in the order that it's presented. So the first thing you need to do is look at the CSV files, and from that design a database. Then the next step is to write some Python code which should convert the CSV files into SQLite into the database, and the final stage is to write a GUI using tkenter or another system. And the whole idea is to take examples given in the lectures or in the computer lab exercises, and then combine them in different ways to complete the coursework. So the first part is design the database. So the first thing to do is look at the CSV files, and you'll see that this is the customer.csv, and the idea here is to identify the kind of entities. So it'll give you a first pass of creating a database. So you get the table headings. So here, looking at the customers, you have the customer ID, home store, customer name, customer email, customer sign-in, customer since, loyalty card number, birth date, gender, and birth year. And for some of these things, it'll be so some of these things you think, well, customer ID, this will be a good key. Other times, this home store might be a good foreign key. And then you need to think about some of the columns. Can you think about the normalization? But the first thing to do is to look in CSV files and identify the column headings, and these will be the starting point, the sort of entities in the tables. And then you have to do some further kind of normalization type activity to get a good design. So we went over ER diagrams and the relationship diagrams in lecture 5A. Lecture 7A has discusses relationships, one-to-many relationships, and a lot of times there's a sort of iterative procedure where you start off with the design and then kind of improve it. So lecture 8A asks you to normalize the database, and lecture 8A describes normalization. Essentially means that you want the same piece of information just in one part of the table. And then I recommend a couple of packages to draw ER diagrams. The one I used, well, there's a podcast there, and all the information. So this gives you a little pointer to where you should be looking at. Okay, so once you have a design, so you're going to you have a design how you want the database to look. So what I suggest you use is to use pandas to load in the data for the CS fields, do some cleaning up, and write the tables to an SQLite data file. So we went over pandas. This is this way of working data frames in lecture 8A. And then in lecture 9A, there was information on converting panda data frames into a table with SQLite data file. So this is part of lecture 9A. And here's a bit of code. All these bits of code are available on the DLE, variety of formats. So what this code does is it reads in this CSV file. This one is actually reading it off the web. You can read it off disk. It's printing out the first 5 rows. Then it's connecting to a database, and then it's actually just writing out a table, my tips, and it's writing that out into an SQLite. So you can use this as a sort of starting point. You'll find this code on the DLE under the code for lecture 9a. So you review this lecture, and so this does part of the job. It converts a CSV file and puts it into SQL. So to actually solve the coursework, you're going to have to add a little bit of additional code to clean up, because if you may find that some columns are redundant and there might be missing values. So you have to, once you wrote the CSV file, you might have to clean it up, and then you write it out with using code like this. And then the final part is writing a little GUI, and that discusses to have like a graphical user interface to work with the data. So we discussed this in lecture 6a. That has an example of writing GUI to work with data, and also examples of writing graphs. And if you look in labs, week 6 solutions, there's some examples of combining a GUI with sending SQL commands. And here there's a little podcast. So all this material is available on the DLE, so I'm just pointing to the relevant bits. Here's a podcast on inserting data into the SQLite database. Okay, so set up Spider. So this is looking at what I said there. This is one of the lab exercises, and I posted solutions to these. Okay. So you've already probably seen this file, but this is one of the solutions to the lab sessions. And what this code does, it connects to the database aquila.db, and then I enter a command, and then when I enter an SQL command, it produces output. Okay, so here I have my little GUI, and I'm going to put in some simple okay, so here's my SQL command. When I run the command, you see it's pulling information. So I asked for everything from the actor table inside that file. It's aquila.db, and it's produced all these things. And so you can use a system like this to modify it. So this dumps out everything in the SQL, but the actual SAS in the coursework is to actually modify this, well, to do some statistical analysis. Okay, and if I load in okay, rather than running Spider, I'm going to run so Spider's giving me a little trouble. So this is one of the solutions. This is the solution to lab 6. If I just run by hand the script, this is in the lab exercises. If I click on this button here, this produces a bar graph. So this just shows that in the lab sessions you did work through an example, and this thing you present a bar graph, but you're going to have to modify this example where you click on a button and it'll give you it'll do the histogram of the data extracted from the database. Okay, and I say here's a little podcast. So one of the things is also inserting data into the podcast, and here's a little podcast time about inserting data into the database, and here's a little podcast of inserting data into an SQLite database. Okay, so in conclusion, the coursework is all about just combining the various material covered in the lectures and in the labs to do this to do this bigger problem.